When a criminal crosses a border, things get complicated. Different countries mean different laws, different systems. Local police can't just go and arrest beyond their jurisdictions. That's where Interpol steps in. Headquartered in France, the International Criminal Police Organization, more commonly known as Interpol, connects law enforcement agencies from 195 countries. They don't go out and arrest people themselves. Instead, they share intel, piece together information, and help police work together across borders. Interpol's most serious alert is called a red notice. It's like a global warning that someone is dangerous and wanted for serious crimes. Usually, very violent ones. It's not an actual arrest warrant, but it tells countries that if they catch this person, they should send them back to the country where the crime happened. Today we're diving into 5 extremely violent fugitives currently flagged by Interpol, still out there, still wanted, and maybe a lot closer than you'd think. This video is inspired by the FBI's 10 most wanted and Japan's 4 most wanted explained. But here's the thing. Those lists have 10 people or less. Interpol's list has just over 6,500, and they're not ranked in any particular order. And obviously I won't be covering them all in this video, but I'll probably try to cover more people in future videos. Now, let's lift the thin veil. Sometimes, the most dangerous predators aren't the ones hiding in the dark. They're the ones who blend in. A friendly face, a familiar voice, a routine that looks just like everyone else's. But behind the wheel of a truck, across endless highways, something far more sinister was unfolding in Russia, and no one connected the dots until it was far too late. It was just a normal summer evening for 15-year-old Katya Morozova. She was hanging out with her friends, Tatiana and Sergei, when they got into a big argument. Katya, in anger, ran off home for the night. When she returned, her grandmother heard her screaming at someone on the phone, and so she was inclined to check on her granddaughter. This enraged Katya further, and so she stormed out of the house in the middle of the night. 3 days later, Katya's grandmother received a text from her saying she would not return. Katya had stormed out of the house before and always come back, but this time, Katya did not return. She hasn't been seen since July 2011. There were many such cases of women going missing between 2006 and 2012, especially along the stretch of Samara to Chelyabinsk highways going through the city of Orenburg. Another case was that of Irina Nikolskaya, a 25-year-old stay-at-home mother who spent her days busy looking after her baby. On the morning of November 3rd, 2011, her husband left for work, and when he returned home that evening, she was just gone with no trace. She was never heard from again. When her husband walked upstairs to their baby's bedroom, he noticed an icon of Our Lady Kazan sitting at the head of the crib, as if Irina had said goodbye. Irina's family had long thought that she had been suffering from postpartum depression and had finally broken down and run off. This, however, turned out not to be the case. Despite several other women going missing, the police did not connect them to one another. Most of the women going missing lived in cities and villages within the forest belt along the highways. But as the distance of the missing victims spanned approximately 1,900 kilometers, they had no reason initially to believe the crimes were linked. It wasn't until June 2012, when 18-year-old Olga Zuravlyova was reported missing, that the police made some progress. But it came with a terrible twist. Olga had left her house on the evening of June 30th, 2012 to catch a bus so she could celebrate at a university event in the city center where she was supposed to first meet with a friend. At 9:10 p.m., she called him to let him know that she missed the bus and she would wait for a taxi. When her friend called her 20 minutes later to check up on her, she never picked up, and that was the last anyone would hear from Olga. During the police's investigation in July 2012, witnesses had spotted a girl thought to be Olga getting into a white Songyong SUV with a man. CCTV footage in the area corroborated the reports, and the car was traced to the city of Orsk, just 100 kilometers southeast of the southern tip of the Ural Mountains. Only 2 Songyong SUVs were registered to the area, and the one spotted on camera was found to be registered to a then 55-year-old man named Valery Nikolaevich Andreev. The thing about Valery was that he seemed to be a pretty ordinary guy. He had a regular upbringing and a wife and 2 children, supposedly part of a loving family. His co-workers and friends mostly had positive things to say about him. He had no prior convictions other than a few speeding tickets. On the face of it, there was nothing different about him. But because his car was caught on camera, Valeri was eventually called in for questioning, which he attended. However, because he didn't take any ID with him, the police asked him to go back home and come back with it another day. Meanwhile, the police decided to dig deeper into Valeri, and what they found was quite shocking. Valeri was a long-haul trucker, and his route was exactly along the stretch of Orenburg, Chelyabinsk, and Samara highway where several women had been reported missing. This was initially chalked up to coincidence because so many people had vouched for Valeri's good nature. But as the interviews continued, it wasn't long until the others who knew him told the police a different story. Valeri had what Russian authorities called, quote, trouble communicating, unquote, and showed signs of severe social anxiety and mood swings, leading him to suddenly get extremely angry. Upon searching Valeri's personal car and work truck, police found condoms, jewelry, women's underwear, hairpins, and traces of semen, various women's hair, and also blood. When the police searched his garage, what they found was shocking: bloody hammers, knives, and fishing lines with human skin on them. Valeri's co-workers said they'd often seen him soliciting with women they thought were sex workers, especially because they were often younger, but it turned out later that those women were most likely his victims. They said he would choose to take long routes late into the night, as he claimed he preferred minimum contact with people. It turned out that on his routes, he tried to scout for women hitchhiking, waiting alone, or even waiting at a bus stop. His seemingly good nature and older age likely didn't cause alarm, and so they'd get into his truck, and when in his Sangyong SUV, it is believed he'd tell women he's a private taxi driver. He'd then take the victim to a secluded spot in the forest, force himself on them, and then take their lives, likely through violence with a blunt object. After discovering his potential weapons, police summoned Valeri again, but this time he didn't show up. Valeri had called his wife on July 6, 2012, said his goodbyes, and remains at large to this day. Initially, searches were made in the cities he used to frequent as a trucker, including Samara, Chelyabinsk, Orenburg, and Nizhny Novgorod, but to no avail. He was dubbed the Orsk Maniac and put on a national wanted list with a reward of up to 1 million rubles. This was worth about $35,000 in 2012. It wasn't until over a year later, September 10, 2013, that the remains of his last confirmed victim, Olga, were discovered. Her body was found in a forested stretch near the Orsk-Chelyabinsk highway, close to the village of Janatolob. After that, the tips started pouring in. People from all over Russia, and even Kazakhstan, claimed to have spotted him. Police chased down leads all over Karelia, Mordovia, Udmurtia, the vast Siberian Federal District, but every trail went cold. In some of the more rural areas of Russia, some resort to using clairvoyance, and after several years of inaction from the police, most of the family members of Valeri's victims did exactly that. Numerous clairvoyants gave family members false hope about these girls who had been missing for years, and they're still at it to this day. 7 years after Valeri first disappeared, Interpol stepped in and issued a red notice for his arrest. On the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, they released a list of 8 fugitives wanted for crimes against women. At the very top was Valeri Andreev. Since then, nobody has heard anything from him. He slipped right back into the shadows, and many fear he might still be deceiving young women. Although it was confirmed that Valeri Andreev is responsible for the death of at least 8 women and 39 disappearances, Russian authorities state that the number could be as high as 100. She changed names like outfits and left behind husbands like footprints. For over 2 decades, she moved through cities, marriages, and gravesites, quietly collecting wealth and vanishing before suspicion caught up. Behind each tragic accident or sudden death, there was one constant: Eliosa, nicknamed the Black Widow. But by the time anyone saw the pattern, she was already gone. Eliosa wasn't a household name, at least not first. But for Brazilian authorities, she would become one of the most elusive and dangerous women they've ever tried to catch. Born in 1950 in Porto Alegre, Rio Grande do Sul, Eliosa seemed, on the surface, just like any other woman trying to build a life. Not much is known about her upbringing, but by the age of 19, she had started dating her first victim, Carlos Pinta da Silva, a military police officer. At the same time, she was seeing a German doctor named Gunther Wolf and was pregnant with his child. In December 1971, she took a trip with Gunther to the city of Taquara. On their way there, they collided with a truck in an accident that took Gunther's life. Eliosa and her baby survived, and she inherited Gunther's house in Porto Alegre. It seems that this incident was the point when Eliosa decided she could live an easy life by killing off her partners and inheriting what they owned. Some say that it could have been Eliosa who was responsible for the accident, but whether or not that's true, she took very good care to not leave a trail. With each new relationship or marriage, Eliosa wasn't just changing addresses, she was changing names. She was Eliosa Saad, Eliosa Lopez, and Matilda da Silva, each time adopting the surname of her new husband. All this was meticulously planned to evade the radar of the police. In December 1977, Eliosa and her then-husband, Carlos, went on vacation to Salvador, Brazil. There, she shot him 5 times in the chest, and although he survived, for reasons unknown, he chose not to press charges. This fateful decision allowed Eliosa to carry on with her violence, which is exactly what she did. In October 1983, she had a child with another man who died when 2 armed men surrounded his car, stole his personal belongings, and killed him. Eliosa inherited multiple properties and cars from his murder. By 1991, she was married to 3 men at the same time, with one of them fathering one of her children. One of them, a wealthy Syrian businessman named Nicolas Saud, was found dead at home. His death was blamed on a heart attack and late-stage cancer, but quite suspiciously, he was found dead in his home with bruises and a broken arm. This death allowed Eliosa to inherit an estate worth approximately $200,000 today, which consisted of several properties. Despite the wealth Eliosa had amassed at this point, she still wanted much more. By 1992, out of the surviving 2 husbands she was still married to, one of them, Jorge Ribeiro, owned a very successful phone line business and she wanted it, along with his portfolio of properties. So in February 1992, she arranged for a hitman to visit his office late at night, tie him up, and assault him with a sledgehammer until he was dead. Her most notable murder, and what would eventually lead her to a life on the run, was her 5th go at a sham marriage. On November 28, 1992, Eliosa walked down the aisle again, this time marrying Wagi Ilyas Murad, a Lebanese-born merchant. By now, it was a familiar pattern. She quickly wove herself into Murad's family, even becoming the godmother to his son's child, all while carefully hiding the long trail of death and deception behind her. For a few months, life seemed normal. Murad's son, Eli, got married, and a new grandson was born. But just 10 days after that happy moment, tragedy struck. Wagi Murad was out with a friend when a man stepped out of a taxi, pulled out a gun, and opened fire. Both men were killed on the spot. The shooter fled into the night without a trace. At first, it seemed like a random act of violence, but Eli Murad wasn't convinced. He started digging, using his connections to hire private investigators to look into his father's wife's background. This is when he discovered Eliosa's secrets, the bigamy, the frauds, and the pattern of ex-husbands and boyfriends turning up dead while she quietly inherited their money and property. In October 1993, as Eli and a police officer were on their way to the police station to hand over evidence, they were ambushed. 2 gunmen pulled up alongside their car and opened fire. The police officer was shot multiple times and killed instantly. Eli was hit on the head but survived after spending 2 weeks in intensive care. Despite nearly dying, Eli refused to back down. His continued investigation eventually led to the formal charges against Eliosa for aggravated murder in 2005, specifically linked to the death of another partner, Jorge Ribeiro. But she wasn't out of society for long, as she fought the charges, filing appeals that delayed the trial for years and buying her enough time to escape. By around 2010, with the pressure closing in, Eliosa vanished. Authorities believe she used forged documents once again to disappear without a trace. 2 arrest warrants were issued, one for aggravated murder, the other for bigamy. A small reward was even offered for information leading to her capture, but Eliosa was always one step ahead. Eventually, the courts had no choice but to try her in absentia, which basically means she would be tried for her crimes without being physically present. She was found guilty and sentenced to 18 years in prison, but to this day, Eliosa Gonçalves remains one of Brazil's most dangerous fugitives, ranked alongside major drug lords and gang leaders. A red notice from Interpol has her listed as wanted in 188 countries. Prosecutors believe she could still be hiding in Brazil. However, records suggest she fled to the United States in 1994, gained dual citizenship, and continued marrying and divorcing under different names. Her last confirmed sighting was in May 2010 in Florida alongside her then husband. She's also believed to have family in California, Virginia, and New York. Imagine a man who, after committing multiple violent crimes, including murder, escapes from prison not once, but twice, and vanishes without a trace. Norman Volker Franz did just that, leaving a trail of violence across Europe and evading capture for decades. Born in 1970, Norman grew up in West Germany and had a pretty unremarkable and modest life, with hopes of eventually becoming an electrician. But after finishing his apprenticeship, Norman felt that life on an electrician's salary would not be enough for him. He started to mix with small-time criminals in the city of Dortmund, whose main method of making money was smuggling and bootlegging, mainly cigarettes, but also selling other stolen goods. Selling stolen goods and fake cigarettes was one thing, but Norman's sudden and pretty drastic escalation into violence was another. There are conflicting statements on what led to this situation. One story said it was a deal gone wrong, but another account was that Norman and his accomplices were staging a robbery which went wrong. Either way, on May 15, 1995, after some kind of disagreement with 3 customers and some of his fellow accomplices, he decided to have his revenge. Norman lured the 3 customers to a deserted street near Dortmund's Cyberg district, a quiet stretch where no one would be around to hear what was about to happen. When the customers arrived, Norman blocked their car with his own. Calmly, he walked up to their window, asked them to roll it down, said he just needed to, quote, talk for a minute, unquote. The moment the window lowered, Franz straight up just pulled out a hand grenade and hurled it inside their car. One man died instantly in the explosion, which set the car on fire, but another, badly wounded, managed to stumble out of the wreckage and tried to run, but Norman and his accomplices caught up with him and executed him with several shots to the head. The third man managed to escape the initial chaos, sprinting into the night. But Norman wasn't finished. He and his crew jumped into a car, chased the man down, and opened fire with a pump-action shotgun through the car windows, hitting him and leaving him gravely injured but alive. That night, Norman became a murderer. The surviving customer eventually went to the police and told them everything, and Norman was officially listed as a wanted man. Public calls to actions were made in the news, and so Norman and his girlfriend, Sandra, decided to flee the country. They made it to Spain and stayed for a few weeks before flying to the Netherlands, where they were recognized and eventually caught in Osnabrück. Norman had changed his appearance, something he'd do often after committing a crime, but the story doesn't end there. After being extradited back to Germany, he was sentenced to life in prison in March 1996, but Norman had other plans, and for this, he needed Sandra's help. Sandra kept up her visits to Norman in prison, and they got married at some point. In early 1997, during one of her visits, Sandra smuggled saw blades into the prison. Then, in March that year, Norman used them to cut through his cell bars, crawled down a rain gutter, scaled the prison wall, and escaped to where Sandra was waiting outside in her car. The couple eventually escaped to somewhere in central Germany near Weimar, but their violence didn't stop there. In fact, Norman was more ruthless than ever. Just 2 weeks after his escape, he shot and killed an armored cash van driver outside a bank and made off with several thousand Deutschmarks. He managed to escape and evade being suspected, but for Norman, it wasn't enough. He wanted more, and he was willing to kill again to get it. In July 1997, Norman and Sandra targeted another money transport scheduled to pick up weekend earnings, this time in the town of Halle. Weekend pickups were much higher in value than weekday pickups, and this is what they had planned for. When the van arrived, shots were fired once again. 2 guards were gunned down right there in front of the market. After the shooting, Norman and Sandra fled with nearly 500,000 Deutschmarks, but by then, the police were closing in. Witnesses had identified their getaway car, a red Volkswagen Polo, and investigators quickly connected the incident to Norman. Soon, an international manhunt was underway. Due to the scale of violence of their crimes, the European media dubbed Norman and Sandra a modern-day Bonnie and Clyde, and the couple would escape the country again, this time to Portugal. Using forged documents and assuming new falsified names, the couple bought a BMW, which would eventually be their downfall. They managed to live a relatively quiet life for just over a year. Norman got a job at a real estate company, and they even had a child. With the amount they had stolen, they were able to buy an apartment in a nice part of town by the sea under their new names. But their past would catch up with them pretty fast. It's unknown as to how they found out, but in October 1998, the police were eventually made aware of the BMW being sold to a person who did not exist. It was registered under one of Norman's two false aliases, Michael Stuver and Karsten Mueller. Using this information, the police tracked the car down to a residence in the city of Albufeira, and after discovering that it was owned by two wanted murderers, they set up an ambush. One day, when the family was out on a grocery trip, they were cornered by the police and taken into custody while awaiting extradition back to Germany. But Norman had no plans to go back to Germany. He filed appeals claiming it was unconstitutional for him to be removed from Portugal, where his child would stay along with Sandra in a women's prison, but his reason for doing so was only to buy him some time. Though his appeals were eventually denied, shortly before his scheduled extradition back to Germany on July the 28th, 1999, he put his plan into action. Using a saw and a bedsheet, he cut through his cell like he'd done before and used bedsheets to scale down the walls. That was the last time anyone could verify Norman's last known location. Due to his disappearance, a red notice was issued for his arrest sometime after his escape and has been renewed as recently as 2021. There have been rumors that Norman is either in Morocco or Portugal, and a reward of 100,000 euros has been offered for any information leading to his arrest. In 1992, 3 teenage girls in Spain set out for a night of dancing and never came home. Their bodies were found months later, viciously tortured, and the man believed to be behind it all pulled off one of the most baffling disappearances in criminal history in this controversial case, which some people still claim was a police cover-up. It was November 13th, 1992, and 3 best friends, all aged between 14 and 15, Miriam Garcia, Tony Gomez, and Desiree Hernandez, were buzzing with excitement. There was a school party that night at Cooler, a popular nightclub just a few miles away from their hometown of Alcasser. Miriam asked her dad if he could give them a ride, but he was stuck at home, sick with the flu. Not wanting to miss out, the girls decided to hitchhike, something they'd done before, just that past summer. They figured it was safe enough. Alcasser wasn't known for much, if any, crime, after all. The girls slowly made their way towards the nightclub, flagging down cars as they went. A young couple picked them up first, dropping them off at a nearby gas station. There, they tried their luck again. And then, a white Opel Corsa pulled up. Some accounts say the car had 2 men in it, but other accounts say there were multiple men inside. But the girls felt comfortable enough with them to climb inside without a second thought. They didn't know it then, but that ride would be their last. It wasn't until January the 27th, 1993, 75 long days later, that 2 beekeepers stumbled across something horrific near a ravine called La Romana on their property. Heavy rains had softened the ground, and the makeshift grave the girls had been hidden in gave way. What they found confirmed everyone's worst fears. The girls had been tortured and violently murdered. Much to the luck of the police investigators, the scene was quite messy and careless, which didn't make it hard to track down the perpetrators. The police found a glove with DNA evidence belonging to a man called Miguel Tarica, and also a social security slip with the name Enrique Angles Martins, and a gun cartridge in the grave. When the police showed up at the home of Enrique, they quickly arrested Miguel, but it didn't take long to figure out that Enrique had nothing to do with the crime. The real second suspect was his brother, Antonio Sugar Angles, and he was already long gone. Some of the details are honestly too graphic to share here on YouTube, but after getting their hands on Miguel, investigators were able to start piecing together the horrifying truth about what had happened to the 3 girls. According to the police's reconstruction of the night of the incident, Miguel and Antonio picked the girls up at a gas station. It wasn't long before things took a dark turn. Instead of heading toward the nightclub like the girls had asked, the men drove right past it. When the girls realized what was happening and started to panic, Antonio reportedly used the butt of a handgun to violently assault and silence them. They ended up at an abandoned house deep in the hills, near a place called Barranco de la Romana, a remote rugged area near the Tus Dam. It was there that 2 of the girls were violated. Later, the men drove to a nearby town looking for food, but the girls, terrified and trapped, couldn't get away. Hours later, the 3rd girl was violated as well. The nightmare didn't end there. According to the investigation, the girls were forced into a shallow pit the men had dug ahead of time. What happened next was hideously cruel. Injuries showed that they were attacked with blunt objects and shot before being hastily buried. Some signs pointed to additional harm being done after death, showing the depravity of these killers. Before leaving, the killers tried to cover their tracks, collecting shell casings and cleaning out their car, but they missed enough to tie them to the crime. The only issue was that other DNA evidence found inside the car also pointed to several other distinct profiles of people who were neither of these men. I did mention a little while ago that one witness account states that there were other men in the car, but there isn't much further information available on what the police did with this evidence. Whatever the truth is, it seems like they didn't pursue it any further. Going back to Antonio, he wasn't at the house. He had bolted, vanishing into the surrounding towns and staying one step ahead of the massive manhunt chasing him. He was almost caught in the town of Villamarchant, but managed to outrun a full police cordon. A few days later, he popped up in Minglanilla, the last confirmed sighting of him in Spain, before he turned up in Lisbon in March 1993. From there, his trail splits into 2 theories. One says he stowed away on a cargo ship, the city of Plymouth, but jumped into freezing waters near Ireland when he was discovered, likely drowning or dying from hypothermia. The other theory claims he boarded a ship bound for Brazil, using his dual citizenship to slip into the country unnoticed. Either way, Antonio Angles disappeared like a ghost, and no trace of him has ever been confirmed since. The Interpol issued a red notice for his arrest shortly after his escape. Meanwhile, Miguel served 21 years behind bars. When he got out in 2013, he gave a few interviews, insisting he was nothing but a scapegoat, and the entire thing was a cover-up by the police. Since then, Miguel's life has been murky, first hiding out in the south of France, then resurfacing in Madrid in 2020 after being caught trying to score drugs in a rundown squat. As for Antonio Angles, he's still officially one of Interpol's most wanted. Blue eyes, 1.75 meters tall, wanted for several violent and other crimes. Air traffic controllers have one of the most high-pressure jobs in the world, keeping thousands of lives safe with every decision they make. But in 2011, at a major European airport, the real danger wasn't in the skies. It was inside the control tower itself, where Jean Meyer, the head of operations, was found ferociously murdered. And before authorities could even piece together what had happened, the prime suspect, a fellow traffic controller, had already vanished into thin air. It was extremely early on an ordinary morning in April 2011 at Euro Airport, Basel Mulhouse Freiburg in St. Louis, France. Jean Meyer, the head of operations, was on duty, ready to train a returning intern. That intern was 40-year-old Karim Ouali, back after a 3-month leave for what officials described as, quote, delusions of persecution, unquote. Ouali believed his colleagues were out to get him because of his Algerian roots. This became a big problem in his workplace, as many of his colleagues thought his behavior was erratic, even embarrassing at times. Though Jean had always tried to show him some understanding and decided that he should be allowed to work after a mental health break. He did have a robust educational background after all, and was known to be highly intelligent as a graduate from a prestigious aviation college. But at 7:50 on the morning Karim was due to start, police were called to the control tower after a colleague found Jean Meyer's body with multiple wounds to his back, made with an axe. Given the tower's tight security and strict access protocols, it didn't take long to narrow down the suspect list. Only one person was missing, Karim Ouali. When police searched Karim's apartment, he was already gone. What they found inside was chilling. Extremist writings, racist propaganda, weapons, and a letter addressed to a Swiss magazine. It opened with the line, quote, "What happened at the control tower of Basel Mulhouse Airport was inevitable," unquote. It also went on to apologize to his colleagues for leaving before he could decapitate all 36 of them, and went on to call September 11th a conspiracy while praising Osama bin Laden. What the police didn't realize right away was that Karim had carefully planned his escape long before he struck. Just days before attacking Jean, Karim had quietly withdrawn 25,000 euros from his bank account, enough to disappear for a little while. To save time, he also had the idea of buying a cell phone and mailing it to himself in Switzerland. But Switzerland is not somewhere he stayed long. Shortly after the discovery of his escape, a red notice was issued for his arrest. Many years passed until Karim was seen again. It was in 2018 a new lead finally surfaced. French authorities learned that Karim had actually been arrested in Hong Kong back in 2014, caught traveling under a fake name, Karim Ouali. But because he had no charges on record there, he was released after a month. Then, in 2021, French investigators made another discovery. Karim had been spotted again, this time on a dating site in Hong Kong. Despite locating Karim, the French police have been stalled in apprehending him by the complex political tensions and lack of extradition treaty between China and France. Meanwhile, it's believed that Karim has built a new life in Hong Kong, where he's married and has a child, and now goes by Ouali Aderfi. As always, thank you for listening, and if you like my content, make sure you subscribe, like, and comment on this video. If you want to support the channel, you can find me on Ko-fi or buy me a coffee with the links in the description.